Well, it's starting. It's time to record. All right, there's a lot of exciting news in the Godot community right now. Godot, I don't know. I call it Godot, some people call it Godot. So what is so exciting about Godot community right now? There are two main news mainly. There is Slay the Spire, which is a roguelike deck building game, which kind of spawned off all this genre of a bunch of people making their own deck building, drafting, roguelike games. And I personally really love the game too, and it was really popular. It still is going strong. There's a huge community on the game. They made an announcement saying that they're moving away from Unity during the whole Unity fiasco with the fees and whatnot, right? And we were anticipating the second game, and finally they released the trailer along with confirmation saying that yes, Slay the Spire 2 is built in Godot, which is the engine that we're using. So that is one thing. If you're in the game development community, and if you're in the indie game dev space, there's this content creator named Brackeys. Here it is, Brackeys. I'm gonna say Brackeys because it's Brackeys, right? Very popular, was a kind of like central tutorial guru. If you wanted any tutorials on getting started with Unity, Brackeys had the content, the library full of different tutorials. And he also made an announcement saying that he might come back making a tutorial for Godot in the future. And finally, just 23 hours ago, hey, look, hello again, there it is. He is making a tutorial. I want to kind of watch it, actually. I haven't watched it yet. This will all become relevant why I'm doing all this. Long story short, I'm basically inspired by these stories and things that are happening, and kind of got me to think about new content. So that's why I'm talking about all this. I want to hear what Brackeys has to say.
I've been thinking of something that I could say to try and break the ice, but I think I'll just go ahead and do it.
Okay.
All right, now that's...
You know, as a content creator, well, newly starting content creator, I always have trouble with humoring the audience with like this type of joke. That is a solid joke. I wouldn't have been able to come up with something like that. But hey, here's me learning not just game development, but content creation from Brackeys. Woo, Brackeys, let's go.
Hello everyone, it's been a while. I hope you've all been well. The last time we uploaded a video was over 3 years ago.
Oh yes, it has been so long. And at the time, I actually was still working in Google and kind of messing with Unity at the time. So yeah, I didn't even know about Godot at the time.
And I think it's safe to say that a lot has happened since then, both in the world and in the game dev industry. Personally, I've been taking a break from video games, and to be honest, I wasn't really planning on making any new videos anytime soon. I think for a while that some of the harsh realities of the video game industry had taken away some of the joy that I used to feel when making games.
That's true. Especially now. I mean, I know it was already pretty bad back in the day with all the scandals and whatnot, but especially now with big corporates and like AAA gaming studios taking over all the beloved tools and games and making it more industrialized and kind of like sucking the fun and the uniqueness out of it has really made it hard to stay in the game business. And also, not to mention all the business decisions with Unity and Unreal Engine's fee changes and all the developers and tech workers being laid off from different spaces of game industry and different companies.
From the lack of unionization in AAA to the real challenge of keeping an indie game studio afloat, I think there's an ever-increasing pressure on developers. As someone who started in the game dev space very young with simple and probably naive ideas of what it means to make video games, these realities simply took it out of me for a while. But recently that changed a bit. Not because I discovered some cure that will magically make these issues disappear, because unfortunately I haven't, and they won't. But simply because I saw something that made me excited about making games again. In fact, you could say that it's been a game changer, pun intended.
All right, that was a weak one. See, I give Brackeys the credit when it's due, but that was a weak joke. Weak pun. It's okay. It's okay, Brackeys. You know, it's still better than mine.
And I know that a lot of you feel the same. I'm of course talking about
Source.
open source. Let me explain. I've long been a huge fan of Blender. If you don't know, Blender is an incredibly powerful and now very popular 3D graphics tool. It has capabilities in modeling, sculpting, UV mapping, hugely powerful rendering, and the list just goes on. And the thing about Blender is that it's 100% free. When I started using Blender, it was still pretty small, and not even close to comparing to the mighty industry standard Autodesk suite. But since then, it has become a huge contender in the world of 3D graphics, preferred by many professionals as well. But how can something that is free ever compete with a hugely complicated software suite that costs thousands of dollars in subscription fees? Well, at least part of the answer is that Blender is a complicated software suite that costs thousands of dollars in subscription fees. Well, at least part of the answer is that Blender is what we call free and open source software, also known as FOSS. This means that instead of a company owning and controlling the software with a private codebase, the software is publicly owned and has a public and open codebase that anyone can access and contribute to. If you don't like something about the software or you would like to add a feature to it, you can simply download a copy of it and modify it to suit you.
Yep, open source is huge in the development industry, as you all probably know already. And that is actually the same reason why I jumped into Godot in the first place. Because, like, well, it's open source. Things are messy with like licensing if you use engines or tools that are owned by a proprietary like company. So why not use open source? And there's an opportunity to, download it, modify it, and make it into your own engine as well. You can fork the repository and make it into yours own. And typically, good thing about open source is because a lot of people are working on it together, the community is pretty strong. There's a lot of knowledgeable members of the community in the space that can provide really useful feedback, as opposed to if a software's source code is owned by someone, some company, then even if the experts of the field knows how to utilize the code or how to utilize the tool, a lot of times they don't actually know the inner workings and details. So then most of the high level feedback or tips come from the engineers that are working in the company or have worked in the company before. And I have been that person in Amazon before as well when I was working there. So I am very much aware of it. Open source, good thing is that everybody can look at it. Anybody can become an expert at it if they want to, which allows for a lot more people to kind of fill the space of that need of having expert who can teach you how to use the tools or help you understand how the tools work.
Perhaps merging your changes into the main program. One of the great benefits of this is that it helps ensure that the software development is driven by the needs of the people who use it. It's a hugely democratic way of organizing development. On top of this, open source makes it possible to utilize volunteer work and donations to fund development. This means that the software is free from ties to any single entity and makes it possible for anyone to use it without having to pay subscription fees or owing away part of their revenue. And open source is actually not as niche as you might think. Linux, for example, went from a small hobbyist tool in the early 90s to powering enterprise server.
So I am a huge fan of open source, obviously, for all that reasons. Same thing. And he mentioned an interesting thing about like donations and people contributing to the code base. Like as a main open source creator, because I have my own plugin that works on Godot called Dialog Plugin, right? That I created recently, and it's been fun to manage and release. But I don't have a path of profitability because that wasn't the goal of why I made it. However, there comes a point where I'm like, I wish I could receive enough funding or have enough funding like naturally, continue supporting it without having to worry about, having a separate job that actually pays separately. And that's where I'm kind of curious to see what he says about generally how tools can stay afloat.
So many of the completely mainstream products of our time are built on top of Linux, such as software for cars, televisions, and all Android phones. It also powers most of the internet and the world's stock exchanges. So open source is already an integral part of the digital world we live in today. Now I mentioned that I started making games when I was still very young. But looking back, it feels like the industry was as well. In just the past decade, third-party engines like Unity and Unreal have become huge and industry standard. A big difference from before, where game studios would develop and use their own in-house engines. Also, indie development has gone from something that very few people even knew about to a huge community where hobbyists and professionals alike publish successful game titles.
You know, I am also a victim of recent indie boom, especially since Nintendo Switch came out, right? That time during COVID was a lot of the discovery avenue for a lot of players into the indie world, because it used to be just AAA, great graphic, and needs to be visually stunning, has to have like very specific and recognizable IP, such as like Disney or Bungie or all those things, right?
Largely because of how accessible these third-party engines have become. And the game industry as a whole has become the largest entertainment industry in the world, far surpassing music and movies put together. Now, this is a lot of change, not in a lot of time. And while huge growth like this, of course, creates issues, I think it's important to remember that it also brings a lot of positives. Perhaps most importantly, making games has never been more accessible than it is now. And also, large open source projects like a modern game engine require a lot of manpower to develop, something that wouldn't have been possible with the small game dev communities of just 10 years ago. In fact, just before taking a break from game dev, I was aware of a few open source initiatives, but I didn't think that they were viable alternatives to commercial engines. But holy wow, a lot has happened since to convince me otherwise. And huge props to the game dev community for making that happen. First of all, a bunch of new engines have popped up. And just like with Blender, previously niche software is starting to gain massive followings.
Look at this list. Look at this list. So many engines, right? You know, at the time when I was like getting into Unity, like I've heard of Godot, like people are talking about like, hey, Godot, have you heard of it? There's an open source engine. People think it's a good thing. And then GameMaker as well. But at the time, even just like far back as 4 years ago, it lacked a lot of features that was kind of crucial to making a finalized, polished game. It felt like, at least. So, you know, a lot of people didn't go for it, but hey, 4 years down the road, especially in the last year and a half with the Godot 4.0, like you can do pretty much anything you want with it that you would be able to do with other commercial engines. So kudos.
And just like with Blender, previously niche software is starting to gain massive followings, with many contributing their time and donating to hire full-time developers. The largest example of this being Godot. Godot is a free and fully open source game engine that a lot of developers have recently turned to, and the timing really couldn't be better for this. Godot has actually been around for a while, but in March last year, Godot 4 was released, which was a huge rewrite of the engine, in my eyes making it a great choice for a lot of game projects. And of course, Godot is now riding on a wave of new users, developers, and a huge influx of donations and fund. I've been toying around with it for the past few months, and I've been loving it.
Can you imagine, as a content creator, can you imagine filming this yourself, having this idea as something that you're going to record?
Fun.
I need to do more of those.
Loving it. While many parts of the engine, of course, have a ways to go, it is overall much further than I was expecting. And perhaps more importantly for me, it forced me to learn new things, and reminded me of why I fell in love with making games in the first place. Now, as for the title of this video, I'm of course in no position to predict the future of the huge industry that now is game development. But I do that part of making that future the best that it can be is to realize just that. Game development is huge now. And while this of course brings a lot of negatives, it also means that there are more game developers than ever before, who all share a love for the same thing. And that perhaps a part of this future is software that is open source, democratically owned and community funded. Now, I want to be totally clear here. I'm by no means encouraging you to stop using third-party engines like Unity, Unreal, or GameMaker. Nor am I saying that you should all use Godot, or any other open source engine for that matter. I've been using Unity for many years and made well over 400 videos on it, so it's safe to say that I like the software. In the end, a game engine is a tool, and you have to use the tool that is right for you and your project. All I hope to do with this video is to inform you that there are many engines out there, and hopefully to inspire you to think of the possibilities of what can be achieved through different ways of organizing software. At GDC last year, one of the co-founders of the Godot engine, Juan Linetsky, gave a talk titled Godot as an open ecosystem, with a lot of sharp observations about open source in the game dev industry. It goes into detail about how open source can be beneficial for the industry as a whole, and I highly recommend you check it out. So, in the spirit of open source, we'll be releasing some new videos on Godot.
Woo, there it is! He's making some new videos on Godot. He's making some tutorials, which gives me some ideas too, so.
I've been hard at work learning the engine, and while I'm no expert yet, and things are a bit different this time around, there's no team, there are no patron supporters, we aren't in an office, in fact we're recording this from our home. I, with the help of Sophia, have done our best to create a couple of videos on the most essential parts of Godot. The first video will be a mega tutorial on making your very first game in Godot and should be out next week. The second one will be a complete overview of the GD script language and will be out within a month.
Overview.
We really can't wait to share them with you. And we thought that since so many things are different this time around, we might as well try something new. So the new videos will be in Danish.
Danish? Okay. Alright, well, doesn't matter for me.
Hej alle sammen, og velkommen til vores første video om Godot. I den her video skal vi se på de mange Ja, hvad så?
Jeg er sikker på, at det virker det der med at gøre det på dansk.
Ja, jeg synes, det virker meget godt.
Jeg tror lige, jeg synes, vi skal bare tage den på engelsk en gang.
På engelsk? Det gør vi. Hello everyone, and welcome to our first video on Godot.
Exciting, exciting. Okay, so that's the news. Brackeys, a very popular, back in the day, Unity tutorial content creator, is coming to Godot and teaching Godot. And in that spirit, I myself as well will get on tutorial train and will try to provide tutorials for the community so they and anyone who has 0 to expert experience can learn to build a game. Not only tutorials, I actually want to focus on shooting a video in a kind of minimal cut versions of me actually going through achieving a goal so that you can see the mistakes and then the roadblocks that I may face and how I fix it and how I discover ways to solve a problem in order for certain effects or gameplay to happen in the game development. That way, hopefully, I'm not just simply teaching or showing ways to code or create a certain feature, but I am sharing how you can fish your own fish. Fish your own fish. Is that right? Yeah, because I am a huge believer of that. And honestly, when I released that dialogue plugin release video with me coding, a lot of people really appreciated me making mistakes in there and addressing the mistakes in the video to show, hey, these are some of the common things that can happen. And of course, I'm always open for criticism. That way I can always come back with more videos saying that, hey, this doesn't work in this specific case. If you want to optimize in this manner or that manner, do it this way. So, open conversation, honest tutorial. That is my goal. I'll leave Brackeys to do the library and whatnot. I myself want to do more raw tutorial, raw experience. So, if you're interested in seeing that, subscribe and like the video and join me in learning Godot together. So I'll be back with that video very soon. The first video I mentioned earlier, Slay the Spire. First video, my goal is to make a roguelike deck builder in Godot. Maybe it should be titled How to Build Roguelike Deck Builder in Godot. A complete guide to roguelike deck builder on Godot. That is pretty baity, I think. That's clickbaity, right? Anyways, the point is I'm gonna try to cover it all. And the first project is making a roguelike deck builder. So join me. Yep, that's it. And thanks for watching.